put you on the map. This is Ron Costa broadcasting live from the Mapable USA studios in Las Vegas, Nevada. And today, folks, we're going to talk about the FCC and some of the changes in crowdfunding. You're all going to be really interested to find out about this information if you're in crowdfunding in any manner at all. So before we do that, let's introduce Vicky Hachmala from the QOZ Marketplace and the World Token Market. Vicky, how are you today?
I'm outstanding today, Mark. We have a great guest with us today, Mark Roderick. We're going to talk about new changes to crowdfunding. It's an excellent day in Vegas, and it's Friday. Oh, Friday the 13th. But
it's Friday the 13th, and we're lucky to have our guest coming. You see what I did there? Friday the 13th and lucky?
Yes.
Right? Yeah.
That was quite clever.
Yeah, it kind of was. So let's introduce our guest. Repeat guest as usual. We love this guy. Let's introduce Mark Roderick. Mark is the founder, actually the co-founder of Lex Nova Law. Mark, how are you doing today?
I am doing just fine. It was a rainy day here on the East Coast this morning. It's now a beautiful, well, it's dark, but it was an hour ago. It was a beautiful sunny autumn day. So I'm doing just fine.
Yeah,
Good.
Over here, we missed that whole season, Mark. We went from like 90 degrees to 50 in one day. So it was a crazy weather here in Las Vegas.
Yeah, it went
do you
from
know
summer
that,
to fall.
Do you know that September, the September we just went through is the warmest September ever recorded worldwide, speaking of 90-degree weather?
Wow.
I believe that because in September we were still having 100-degree weather. In September is kind of hot.
Yeah. Well, I'll
For
tell you
Vegas,
what.
it's usually cooling down by then.
Yeah, and Mark, before we get into the meat of the podcast here, I've got to tell you, today's Friday the 13th, and a lot of people don't know what happened on November the 13th in TV land. And I don't know if you were ever a big fan of The Odd Couple, but today was the day that Felix Unger was asked to remove himself from his place of residence. And I told that to somebody today, some kid. He had no idea what The Odd Couple was, and I said, you know what? I'm getting old.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, so,
well, I guess you didn't know that already. Is that right, Ron?
That's right.
Or maybe he forgot it.
Yeah, he's forgot it.
Yeah.
So, well, let's talk about some of these new things going on because it is very exciting.
Yes.
Tell us about the new changes that the SEC has not put in place but approved.
Well, I'll tell you, it's funny you should ask that question because in ordinary times, I guess, in days gone by, I would know exactly which changes you were talking about because there aren't usually very many in this space, and I would just answer your question. But these days, fortunately, I mean, the SEC has been busy trying to facilitate the private securities markets, which, of course, is, it's terrific because that's where all the jobs in this country come from, small businesses.
Right.
And so there have been a whole bunch of things you could be referring to. You could be referring to a whole basket of new crowdfunding changes, some involving Title III crowdfunding, also known as regulation crowdfunding, some involving Regulation A or some Regulation A plus, as it's sometimes incorrectly referred to. Or you could be referring to the changes to the definition of accredited investor, which is just hugely important, and those are about to come into effect on December 8th of this year. Or you could be referring to the SEC proposals about finders and formalizing and legalizing kind of a very common but legally back alley way to raise capital. So those are all things that are going on right now, each of which would have a significant effect, but cumulatively I think it's going to have an enormous and all positive effect on the private capital markets. So you pick one, throw a dart.
I think I meant what were the most important changes that have come out of the SEC over the last 3 months, 4 months? That, from your point of view, what do you think are the most impactful?
Okay. What do I think is most important? I will tell you, Vicki, what I personally think is most important, and that is the changes to the Title III crowdfunding rules. There have been a bunch of changes, but there are two that collectively or together are just going to be, I think, super important. One is that whereas up until now, an issuer could raise only $1 million a year, $1,070,000 technically, but using round numbers, could only raise $1 million per year. That limit is about to go up to $5 million, and that is, the jump from 1 to 5 is huge. When you think about, particularly in the real estate market, say, or in general in the private capital startup market, 1 million is a small number. There aren't many real estate projects that, that you can fund with less than $1 million of equity. But when you raise it to 5, wow, the whole world opens up. Tons and tons of deals are done with less than $5 million equity. So it just enormously opens the market for Title III crowdfunding. And I'll just remind everyone Title III crowdfunding is relatively inexpensive, and it allows you to raise money from non-accredited investors. So that's one of the changes, the raise in the cap from 1 to 5. But the second change is, up until now, even accredited investors were extremely limited in how much they could invest in a Title III offering, and which has made it extremely difficult to raise money using Title III, because if no one can invest more than $10,000, say, just to pick a number, you got to convince a lot of people to invest. Like if you're trying to raise even $1 million, much less 3, divide $3 million by $10,000. That's, you got to convince 300 people at least to invest. The new rule is going to say for accredited investors there are no limits. So accredited investor can come around and write the whole $3 million check for that raise. And the limits for non-accredited investors are also going up, but they still will be limited. But the huge change is allowing accredited investors to invest however much they like. And when you put those two things together, accredited investors can now write whatever check size they want, and the issuer can raise up to $5 million per year. That totally changes the landscape for Title III. Oh, yeah. Up until now, Title III has been a backwater. In general, I'm speaking in generalities, there have been plenty of great companies raising money, but by and large, they haven't been great companies. Because of all these restrictions, who wants to go through the hassle and be so limited? But now the neighborhood is totally being changed. We're moving from the wrong side of the tracks to the right side of the tracks. And I believe that Title III is going to become, over the next couple of years, the go-to method to raise money. Every Title II portal should immediately be creating a Title III arm so they can raise money from non-accredited investors now. I just think it's going to go from being a tiny, tiny market to being a much, much larger, more robust market. The portals are going to be able to start making money, and when markets start to work, just like, to use that neighborhood metaphor, when neighborhoods start to turn into better neighborhoods, all these contributing factors, feed one another. The artists
Right.
move in, and a few, coffee shops move in, and then some younger, more affluent people move in, and it all seems to work together. And I think that is how the Title III market is going to work for the benefit of companies raising capital and ordinary American investors who will now be able, without restriction, to participate in the engine of American capitalism. And I just think it's all for the good.
Well, and when they changed the rules about finder's fees or commissions and that opens everything up too, because now there's a larger niche of people out there that are able to participate. So that means payment of more commissions and fees to the people who find them and bring them where they need to go.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And now they'll be able, by following just a few simple rules, they'll all be able to do it legally. And it's always good. But that is going to, as you're suggesting, release a dynamic that is always been restrained. In other words, you might know a bunch of people with money. Now, I understand you hang out with Ron all the time, but you might also know some successful people.
Well, this is true. I keep hoping.
And
I keep hoping for Ron.
When these finder's rules are finalized, you will then be able to monetize those relationships, and it'll give you the financial incentive to go learn about these companies, learn what they're doing, find the best companies, talk to your friends about them. I think the whole idea here with the SEC, with which I am fully on board, is sort of releasing the pent-up energy of ordinary Americans, incentivizing everyone to learn about small companies, invest in small companies, because that can just be an incredible source of energy for the American economy, which it sorely needs.
Oh yeah, and also it improves, or I don't know what word I'm looking for, but it reestablishes, I guess, that American dream that you even though you don't have a lot of money, you can still invest in a small business, you can still be part of the game, and you can still live the American dream albeit a lower level. You're still living the dream, and it's cyclical to everybody. It impacts everybody exponentially.
Yes, I mean I think capitalism is, and I don't want to sound like, well, I will admit to you, I am a Democrat. And I believe the government has an important role. But I am also a fervent capitalist. Capitalism, like it or not, capitalism has improved the worldwide human condition almost beyond the imagination. It is the human condition has just incredibly improved under this capitalist system, and it can continue to. But as you both know, many Americans, and especially many young Americans, no longer have faith in our capitalist system, and it's not because they're wrong. But our capitalist system has lost its energy. There's too much wealth stratification. Too much of the goodies only go to a small segment. So now I went from sounding very capitalist. Now I'm going to start, to sound more like a Democrat. But too much is too much wealth is held by monopolies. The powerful have too much power, and what we need to do is release the energy of ordinary Americans, and I believe then people will see, hey, this can work for me. This really does work. It doesn't just work for rich people. It works for me too. And I think that will solve a lot of problems. So that's my philosophical bent.
Well, which is why the changes to the SEC changes are so important, because it does exactly that. It kind of equalizes everybody to look forward to the American dream, participate in it, and see that capitalism is the way to get it, and there's nothing wrong with it. But
that's right.
Like you said, control the people with too much power, because that's not a good thing. But bring up the people that don't have the power and show them that they can, play in the game too.
Yeah, and I mean, don't forget, the Jobs Act was signed into law, believe it or not, by Barack Obama. And it was the most important bipartisan piece of legislation during his administration. And the reason is crowdfunding satisfies both,
Right.
From a Republican point of view, crowdfunding unleashes capital to flow through the veins of our economy and create jobs and create opportunities. And from the Democratic point of view, as that blood is flowing through the veins, everyone benefits, not just the higher ups, but the lower downs benefit. So it is something that is truly good for everyone, and can and should be supported by all ends of the political spectrum.
True. That's true.
I agree. And so, Mark, just to be on the clear side of this, like in real estate, you have these guys out there looking for properties. I believe they call them bird dogs, I guess, and they supposedly are going to get a fee for identifying a property for a guy, and theoretically, that's not allowed because they don't have real estate licenses. Are you saying now with the crowdfunding, with these new rules, like somebody doesn't need a Series 7 license now to do this kind of referrals and get paid for referring businesses? Is that what this is all about?
This is about. It's not the guy who goes out and finds real estate and gets paid a commission, even though he's not a licensed real estate broker. I have nothing to say about that. This is about the guy who goes out and finds money for the real estate development. So the developer has identified this property but needs $5 million of equity to develop it. Where does he get that equity? And he starts looking around for people who can help him finance it. And this fella over there named Ron happens to know a few, people with money. They don't have to be billionaires, but a few people who might like to invest in this deal. And Ron introduces these few people to the developer. And they have a deal right out in the open that if Ron's friends invest, Ron will get 5%. Today, that arrangement might or might not be legal, depends on the circumstances, and Ron and everyone else has to decide whether to take the risk of doing it. Under the SEC's proposal, that will be completely legal. Every Ron can do that, and every developer who knows Ron's, can raise capital that way. Again, just improving access to capital. That's what it's all about.
Exactly. To me, that sounds like it's a no-brainer. That is such a great revision to the rules. I mean, who could be against that? That doesn't. Is there a downside to that?
Well, funny you should ask. You know who's going to be against it? You know who's going to be against
dealers?
it?
Probably the broker dealers.
Man, we couldn't have set that up any better if we had scripted it. You really teed it up for your partner there, because yes, it's because the broker dealers are sitting there saying, now wait a second, we had to for us to get commissions, we had to register with the SEC, become a member of FINRA, take all these FINRA exams. Why did Rhonda didn't do any of that? Why should he be allowed to get a commission when we're not? You have exactly identified the group most likely to resist this change.
Yeah, but they should be happy because on the other end, you've opened up now to non-accredited investors, and now even though they had to go through all the problems, now they can, have a lot more clientele bringing money from here to there, so they should be actually making more money. Or am I confused?
Well, hopefully. No, you aren't confused. But so from the beginning of crowdfunding, I just gave a little speech about why everyone should be happy. Well, guess who's not going to be happy about crowdfunding? It's that same broker-dealer world. It's the same Wall Street world. Because what crowdfunding does, and these new finders rules, they diminish the significance of Wall Street, right? They allow developers to raise capital and entrepreneurs generally to raise capital without using Wall Street, without passing all those trillions of dollars, from the East River to the Hudson and people taking a little piece of it off the top. So you haven't gotten pushback from those people so far just because the money wasn't big enough. But as crowdfunding accelerates and the little trickling stream of capital turns into a little bit larger of a stream, I think you will get pushback from the regulated community. And that's what always happens, actually. Whenever middlemen get dispossessed, they look for protection from the government. That's kind of what we were talking about before, and that's called rent seeking. They seek to protect their market with regulation, and that's what causes the kind of sclerosis of capitalism that we have a lot of now. People have these protected little fortresses that don't allow competition. So we will definitely expect to see more of that as crowdfunding accelerates, and we have to be ready to deal with it.
Will they be able to influence the SEC to go backwards?
Absolutely.
That's too bad.
That's what happens, right? That is what happens, and it's a problem with government that the industries that are supposed to be regulated end up taking control over the regulators. For example, who do you think calls the shots at the U.S. Department of Energy? And the answer is
all of the
big oil and gas
producers.
companies do. Exactly.
Yeah.
They're supposed to be regulated, but it turns out that over time the exact opposite happens, and that is, it's a serious problem. And then you end up with what we call crony capitalism, where the powerful get more powerful because they write the rules for themselves. But, I don't want to sound negative now, because right now what's about to happen in Title III crowdfunding and with the finders thing, I think is 100% positive.
So do I. I think so too. But we're talking about finders in a general term. I think there is a tier of finders too, right? Isn't there, Mark? Isn't there a distinction between one type of finder than another?
Yes, that's right. The SEC proposals have two tiers of finders. The reason that I haven't said anything about it is that the first tier, no one's going to care about the first tier of finders. They're so limited in what they can do. It's Ron. Ron would be able to find investors for one offering every year. Okay, and you wouldn't even be allowed to talk with the potential investors about the offering. You would just be able to make an introduction, period, that's it. So, I mean, that's not how the market's going to work. The market's going to work because someone like Ron says, hey, I know a bunch of people. I think I can make some money doing this. And he's going to search out the best deals, and he's going to search out investors, and he's going to put them together, and he's going to make money. So that's why I don't really talk about Tier 1 finders.
I got you.
It's sort of like Tier 1 of Regulation A. You know, no one does it. There's no reason to do it. So people rarely talk about it. I should also say, haven't talked about Regulation A, but that limit is going from $50 million to $75 million a year. So that's an improvement as well.
Actually, let's get back to something you talked to way back when the podcast started. You mentioned that Regulation A plus is sometimes referred to as Regulation A plus is referred to as Regulation A plus, and you said that was incorrect. Why is that?
There's no such thing. There's no Regulation A plus. So there's only Regulation A. So Regulation A has been around for 50 years. And then in the Jobs Act, Congress told the SEC to make changes to Regulation A to make it better. So the SEC made those changes, and there's still only Regulation A, but because it's an improved version of what it used to be, people started referring to it as Regulation A plus. But there's just, if you say, okay, well, we'll do Regulation A plus, where is Regulation A? It doesn't exist. There's only one thing, and it's called Regulation A.
That's why.
Oh, so it's just vernacular.
It's just vernacular, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And another philosophical question maybe I have for you, too, is, we mentioned about how Reg CF now is increased from 1 million to 5, et cetera, and it's going to open up a lot of doors. My question really is why was it at 1 just to begin with? Do these people not understand that 1 really didn't open any doors and that 5 should have been the maximum right from the start?
Well, that is a great question, too, Ron. You should do podcasts.
I'm going to teach him how to do that, Mark.
Yeah, you should. But it is. It really goes to the heart of what we're talking about. So, when the Jobs Act was enacted, there were 3 pieces. There was Title II crowdfunding, which is Rule 506C, Title IV crowdfunding, which is Regulation A, and then Title III crowdfunding. 2 and 4 were just very natural extensions of things that existed already, right? I mean, We've been doing private placements forever. All Title II crowdfunding says is, okay, now you can do them online. You didn't used to be able to do that. Now you can do private placements online. Okay, that's not that big of a deal, really. I mean, in some ways it was, in other ways it wasn't. Regulation A, as we've just finished talking about, is just an improvement on what had been there for 50 years. You have to put together a prospectus, submit it to the SEC, go through comments, get approved. Yes, you no longer have to, register with states, but it existed. It was already there. So both of them were well-known animals in the American securities law zoo. Not Title III. Title III was a brand new animal at the zoo that for the first time ever allowed you to, advertise broadly to non-accredited investors without any SEC review. I mean, that's just didn't used to be able to do that ever, since 1933. When the first Securities Act was signed by President Roosevelt. Couldn't do that. You had to do a public offering of some kind, either a full-blown public registration or a Regulation A offering. So Title III was really, really different and new, and a lot of people were genuinely concerned that, people like me securities lawyers and my clients were going to steal money from widows and orphans. And I say that sounds a little tongue-in-cheek, but it's not tongue-in-cheek. People had that genuine concern that this new tool was going to be used to, not to advance the good qualities of capitalism, but to prey on the unsophisticated and unwary. And as a result of that genuine concern, all these compromises were made. Not 5 million, 1 million, and, very, very low limits on how much each person could invest. And, the whole thing about having to register with the SEC and with FINRA for the funding portal. So the old expression, which I've probably used on your show before, there are two things you don't want to ever see being made. One is sausage and the other is law. So that was true. That was true of Title III crowdfunding. What started out as a very clean, elegant proposal, by the time it got through the sausage making in Congress, it came out looking as laws so often do, like a hybrid between a donkey and a goat or something. So that's why. It was just, we'll throw it out there, we'll see what happens, and maybe later, if the widows and orphans are not robbed, maybe we'll expand it. And that's exactly what's happened.
Yeah, that's interesting.
And look how long it took.
Yeah.
Yeah, in the context of laws being changed, 4.5 years is not that much.
Well, that's true.
I mean, and you got to pat the SEC on its shoulders, which I do at every opportunity. They have just been, someone at the SEC is really paying attention to this market.
Yeah. Yeah,
it is doing its job, yeah.
And which is surprising, because all these years the SEC was supposed to be your enemy. Now all of a sudden they're making all these great decisions for investors and for issuers and for crowdfunding. It's really amazing how they've done like a 180 in the minds of a lot of people. It's great, and it's great for lawyers too, right? Lawyers really do well.
Well, it's great for the economy. I mean, it's actually probably better for lawyers if the SEC is out there, prosecuting people and trying to shut things down. That probably creates more lawyer business. But I have found in crowdfunding that at absolutely every step of the way, the SEC, when it comes to all these forks in the road, well, we can decide we can go through, door one or door two, and they always pick the door that facilitates crowdfunding.
Yes. Yeah, it reminds me of that movie Rounders in the last scene when the girl says to Matt Damon, like, call me when you need a lawyer. And he says, I will, and I will. So,
it's been a very positive experience.
Right. It's been great. And, I know, Mark, you're out there doing some amazing work and really at the top of the whole industry. People who have heard the podcast before know all about you, but for those who haven't, you want to tell people how they can get a hold of you and maybe your website? I know you do a lot of blogging yourself.
Well, probably the best place is my blog, which is I do a blog about crowdfunding, and so my blog is called Crowdfund, all one word, and then attny.com, crowdfundattny.com. That's me. Or actually, if you just Google Mark Roderick crowdfunding, you will also find me, or my firm's website, which is lexnovalaw.com. You will also find me. In fact, I can't tell you how many people have told me they started doing research about crowdfunding on Google, and they just couldn't stop finding me.
Yeah.
So that's a good for me. That's a good problem to have.
Right.
Yes,
you should run for office at that point, right? Get involved in politics.
No, God. God forbid.
Yeah, change the world, Mark.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I
think I can change it more with crowdfunding than running for office.
Yeah, well, I just bought the domain Roderick 2024. Should I forget about that one?
I would sell that pretty quickly if I were you.
Right, yeah. Vicki, any last comments or questions? How about this podcast, man? This is just an amazing amount of information.
This was great. We love to have Mark on as a guest. Let me ask you an off-the-wall question, Mark. What do you think about the blockchain and voting in the next presidential election? Think the blockchain is the solution to the problems that we have today?
I mean, conceptually, yes, but practically, no. I think, I mean, we actually, so I remember, I'm old enough to remember the year 2000, right, with the whole Florida fiasco. And that was, if you will recall, the election just coincided with the very height of the internet bubble. It was to burst shortly thereafter. But anyway, everyone believed then, the internet is the solution. We should be voting online, right? Mm-hmm. It's just that now, from what we know about the ability of hackers, of all, Russian hackers and North Korean hackers and Chinese hackers and American hackers, for that matter, seem to be able to penetrate basically any technology. And now, with all of its ridiculous old-fashionedness and quaintness, I hope we never have another election as bitter as this one. And yet, even in this bitter election, the actual voting system seems to have worked. If the state legislatures allowed counting the mail-in ballots to begin before Election Day, which some do and some don't, then it would have been less drama. But it seems to work. There just is no even suggestion of any interference or, foreign interference or anything like that. So, yes, hypothetically, theoretically, the blockchain technology could do it. I just don't know if we will ever have the faith in a technology to try. I mean, what do you think? Do you think that's the answer?
Well, I think that there's a potential to be able to use it, but whether or not people will feel comfortable enough that there'd have to be an awful lot of marketing to convince people that this is the way to go, and a lot of testing and that to do it. But I believe that voting on the blockchain is a more secure way of knowing that your vote got counted the way it should get counted, because you eliminate all the people who have to count it, and all the people who have to touch it. So if they can create blockchain platforms to run governments, then they should be able to create platforms that allow you to vote even over 300 million people. So I don't know, but it's something down the road, and I think it still needs to be more developed.
Yeah. Maybe they could start, with some little local elections or something, and.
Well, and there are companies that are doing that, and they're starting in this way with little towns or what have you that don't have that large of a population, to see how it could work and if it will work, and get the feel of it so that it can expand it into bigger, go over a county or go over a state or whatever, but it still needs to be coordinated with everybody. So one little town, it's going to take a lot for that one little town to be successful enough to take it across the country.
Yeah,
or one little country to take it across the world.
There's probably a lot of companies that are looking to crowdfund blockchain as well. So that's for sure. We'll have to add them to our list of podcast guests in the future. So that's pretty awesome. We're running out of time here, so let's cut this thing short at this point. And Mark, again, I know you're the busiest person in the world, like I said before. Thanks so much for being on the podcast and enlightening our audience as usual. It was really, really a pleasure.
It is always a pleasure speaking with you guys. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks a lot. And Vicki, thanks for co-hosting the podcast today with me. Folks, you're listening to the Mappable USA podcast at mappableusa.com. You go to that homepage, you scroll down, you see all our syndication sources. Pick the one you like best so you never miss another episode. There's a guest tab there. Fill that out if you want to be a guest on the show like Mark was today. And if you like what you heard, send us an email, info@mappableusa.com, or just leave a comment on whatever page you're listening to this on. So thanks again for everyone. Thanks for your support, and we'll see you next week on another Mappable USA podcast. Have a great week, everyone.